Here's the thing about young voters. Political parties get older, but they stay the same age. The left likes to think it's forever the party of youth, but look at this. For those born after 1980, the party identification gap is closing fast. There's still a long way to go, but can Republicans take advantage without pandering to America's neophytes? I'm James Poulos. This is The Bottom Line. My guest is Margaret Hoover, author of the acclaimed book, American Individualism: How a New Generation of Conservatives Can Save the Republican Party. Hi, Margaret.
Hello, how are you?
Welcome, I'm great. How are you?
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you look at the polls and your book makes the case that yes, the GOP has a moment of opportunity here. They can go after these millennial voters, but you make an interesting case. You say that your great-grandfather, Herbert Hoover, author of another volume called American Individualism, is actually a sort of kindred spirit with today's young voters. How does that work?
So, surprisingly, as I was thinking about how we connect conservative ideas and ideas from the Republican Party, which I argue actually offer solutions that the next generation needs on issues that they care about, but issues that affect their lives most, like spending, generational theft, the environment, education reform. I argue that Herbert Hoover actually channels the ethos of the millennial generation in surprising ways, and he was born, he was living and embodying their ethos 80 years before the first of them were born. Things that characterize the millennial generation. They are globally oriented. You know, Herbert Hoover worked on 4 continents, had visited 6, circumnavigated the globe 5 times before the advent of aviation by steamship. He was an international globalist, global businessman long before the age of globalization that the millennials know now. He was a technologist. He learned his trade in mining engineering in the heart of the Silicon Valley, pioneered the radio technology, was the first person to appear on television. He dedicated his life to the service of others. 83% of millennials have volunteered in the last year, the largest percentage of any age cohort. And they actually believe that government can work. And Hoover spent his entire time in government trying to make government help the private sector be more efficient. He standardized the modern economy. The reason bricks are standard sizes, the reason bed sheets come in twins and queens and kings. Hoover was an engineer, and he sought to order the modern economy, not to over-regulate it. He believed that regulation was overly burdensome. He wasn't for the over-bureaucratizing of business, but he believed that there were certain things government can do as an umpire.
So it's a back to the future moment for the GOP here.
That's the argument I'm trying to make.
A lot of conservatives, they look at that and they look back at history and they say, nowadays globalization isn't working, technology can't fix what's wrong. It might have been true then too, right? You have this golden moment and then it goes away. And they say, you know, if millennials think that that progress is foreordained by history, they're kidding themselves. They're making a dangerous mistake. How do you respond?
This is also the argument that would argue that we should retrench ourselves and not be engaged in a global world. That we should find a new age of isolationism, which I think is counterintuitive to the ethos of the millennial generation. And frankly, where does America win in that? We need to lead in the world.
That's quite a leap, though, right?
You're saying technology doesn't work, global doesn't work, we should just turn inward.
No,
and
we should
there's an argument.
Be skeptical. This is a standard conservative argument, is we shouldn't be over-optimistic about the way that technological advances and sort of coming together of an international market can make the world a better place all the time. You still have violence, you still have unrest. You see Europe is tanking right now, right?
Correct. But what I would argue is that it takes individuals leading, individuals guided by an interest in service and an interest in bettering the world. Look, it can go both ways. You can have evil people get control of technologies and use it negatively, or you can have, you know, idealists, pragmatists, leaders. And America has an incredible history of strong leaders in a global atmosphere, and Herbert Hoover was one of them that I think we can look to for guidance, especially as we connect to the next generation.
Okay, you make the case in the book that American individualism, as it's practiced today in real life, and this is a good thing, is also plugged in with a certain sort of community spirit. I think that's a good argument. It's a nice fusion argument. I buy it. Do you worry that you can't make your case effectively unless you engage with the current debate going on right now about whether the establishment GOP or the anti-establishment needs to win? Right now, we've got the debt ceiling debate going on. A lot of people are starting to ask openly, even of guys like Alan West and Paul Ryan, you know, it's like dyed-in-the-wool conservatives. Is the GOP establishment corrupt? Does it need to go? Is this something that you can just push to the side in order to have this conversation, or do you need to pick a team here?
Well, I think millennials, here's what characterizes millennials. They're pragmatists, not ideologues. They want a way forward. I want a way forward. I don't think you have to pick a tried or true, an old guard, or a Tea Party. The Tea Party has given enormous fusion, enormous energy, brought urgency to the issue of fiscal issues in Washington. The fact that we are not just perfunctorily raising the debt ceiling, the fact that we're actually having a conversation, a real conversation about massive cuts and structural changes in our spending is a win for the Republican Party, for the establishment and for the Tea Party.
Real conversation going on right now, too, on the right as far as culture is concerned. You're a culture warrior on Bill O'Reilly's show. Some conservatives reading your book might accuse you of defining conservative culture out of its original definition. You're pro-gay marriage. You're quoting people in the book who call themselves pro-sex. Maybe not that scandalous to young people, but when it comes to fitting the millennials into the rest of the Republican Party, do you agree with Andrew Sullivan, for example, that gay marriage is actually a conservative thing?
I believe that marriage is a conservative value, whether it's gay or straight. I think we want more marriages in this country, not less. I think a stable foundation of society is built on couples wedding and taking care of each other. This is the fabric of society. I think it grounds society in self-sufficiency and stability. And I believe that it also, when people are wed to one another, they take care of each other economically, and the government doesn't have to. There's a fiscal libertarian argument for this. There is also a conservative argument for this, and that's one of the cases I make. But the reality is, this is just where the next generation is. This is the only generational cohort where over 50% believe that they just, sexual orientation just couldn't bother them at all, and they believe that their gay friend should have the same opportunities that they have to fall in love with the people they fall in love. Whichever. From my perspective, look, I think Rick Perry's 10th Amendment invocation is fabulous. I think it's a way forward for the Republican. 10th Amendment on abortion, 10th Amendment on gay marriage. 10th Amendment, that's fine for the Republican Party going forward. I think for the next generation, I think that they would like to be able to see their gay friends have the same opportunities and rights that they have.
Are they willing to hand that over to the people of their state as a political issue?
I'm a pragmatist with the Republican Party. I want to see the Republican Party connect to the next generation. So I would rather not divide ourselves on these issues. I would rather focus on the things that we can win on, and that was the Reagan model. This is the 80% my ally is not 20% my enemy. I think we have to create a fusionism that can win. I think the idea is to unseat Barack Obama, to have a Republican in the government, a Republican president, and I think in order to do that, we focus on what unites us, not what divides us. But we need to keep in mind there's an entire generation coming up that simply has a different sense of homosexuality and gay rights than the older generations.
People are always looking to put a face on these political movements, a generational face, a sort of attitudinal face. Meghan McCain, she blurbs the book on the back there. She gives you a nice blurb. Is she the future of the Republican Party? Is she a good sort of vision of what it is that you'd like Republicans to be more like as millennials come in?
Meghan is one of several faces. I mean, I think the Bush daughters have been a face. I think George P. Bush is a face. I think there are several. This is American individualism, right? We have lots of individuals who populate this cacophony of new voices. And I think that Meghan is one of them, and she's a great one. She's helped shift many perceptions, especially on the center-left in the country. Oh, Republicans can be for things that I didn't think Republicans could be for. And Meghan says she's pro-sex, but she's also pro-life. And there should be a diversity of views, I think, on social issues that should be permissible within the Republican Party.
Okay, so the pro-life thing and the pro-sex thing, not necessarily contradictory. A little bit harder to cash out in political terms, though, right?
Well, yeah, but Meghan's not running for office.
There you go. So maybe that's a bug or a feature, not a bug.
Maybe.
Okay, let's close this out with just the whole term conservative, right? It seems like you can't have this kind of discussion without the word, without engaging the debate. You've got a chapter in the book about how, let a million different kinds of conservatism bloom. They've all got their own little adjectives attached to them. But do we really need the word conservative? Do you need to engage with the whole question of what conservative is in order to make the argument that you're trying to make about where the Republican Party needs to go and what, on an issue-by-issue basis, needs to be done in order to get young voters to understand that it's actually in their interest to come over in this direction?
I wrote this book partly to connect to the next generation, but really to communicate with the conservative movement and the Republican Party about who the next generation is, so we can talk about which ideas of ours can actually connect. And I actually would like to make the case that the next generation, and the reason I say the next generation of conservatives, is because the millennials don't call themselves conservative. 40% of them call themselves moderate, 29% liberal, 28% conservative. But I think in many ways, a strong fiscal conservative message and messages that the conservative movement puts forward, I think the conservative movement has put the best solutions forward on education reform, for example. And I think we've been quite pragmatic about immigration reform, and I think we can connect to them on many of these issues if we don't let the labels get in the way. And part of what I wanted to do in my conservative tribalism chapter is is talk about the panoply of conservatives out there, to bring light to the fact that there is no one unified purist form of conservatism. There are neoconservatives and paleoconservatives and Western conservatives, which is, my dad toasted at my wedding that we are Western conservatives, and Goldwater conservatives. And in many ways, the conservative movement, people wear a badge to try to let others know what kind of conservative it is. I think ultimately that's not helpful. I think we ought to focus on what we agree on. And Reagan was able to create a fusionism and employ a fusionism in his leadership, which united the conservative movement, and he was largely aided by the fact that all of the factions in the conservative movement were united around defeating communism.
One of the way you close out the book is with this claim, you know, America is exceptional, millennials need to understand that, and once they do, and they can, then they can sort of get out of that box, that mania for labeling. Do you think that the millennials have what it takes to be an exceptional generation?
I think they already are an exceptional generation. They were formed, really, I mean, one of the most important geopolitical event in their life was 9/11. And I think that what this did is it taught them they are interested in being part of something larger than themselves. They care about service, not political service, public service, serving each other. I gave you the stat about how 83% of them have volunteered in the last year. I mean, it's just a value that they harbor. And I think that makes them very different in terms of generations from the baby boomers or from Gen X even. I mean, they believe that government can work. They want to be part of the solution. They do want to make their mark in a positive way. So I think we just need to think in terms of Republicans of where our message is going to connect with them in order to harbor them. Because, you know, that chart you had up at the beginning, well, you've got lean Republican and lean Democrat up there. True. I mean, the reality is 38% of this generation calls themselves independent. 37% Democrat, 22% Republican. There is a huge deficit when it comes to party identification, and partisan identification solidifies after 3 presidential election cycles. They voted for John Kerry in 2004. They voted for Barack Obama by 32 points in 2008. If we don't get them in 16 months, we're going to lose them for a generation.
Well, you know, I think I'm a little more skeptical than you about millennials, but I want to believe. It's a nice story. It rings true. I hope it can happen. Margaret Hoover, thanks so much for stopping by. Margaret Hoover, you can check her out at margarethoover.com. The book is American Individualism, How a New Generation of Conservatives Can Save the Republican Party. She tweets, of course, at twitter.com/MargaretHoover. Sure enough, the political allegiance of young voters is up for grabs. It's fair game, and Republicans shouldn't hesitate to tune up their platform in accordance with the character of the American people. But here's the catch. The values of young voters are up for grabs too. And not just because of the naivety of youth. The same uneasy reality that's changing American politics is calling into question some of the most basic assumptions underlying the millennial worldview. Once young people instinctively distrusted the system. Now, too many of them embrace it with an air of compliant indifference. Do what the people in charge tell you to do, then live it up after hours. Trust that if you do as you're told, you'll get the goodies, the career, the rewards. To them, all too often, globalization and technology mean more cool experiences that make people more similar. To them, all too often, progress sounds inevitable. The real world eats illusions like these for breakfast. I'm all for a Republican shakeup spearheaded by a new generation, but only if they grow up fast. I'm James Poulos. That's the bottom line.